A chapter so complex, that's the last one I figured out in this entire playthrough. Hello everyone, my name is Kebe, and we are about to watch Chapter 16 of my Fire Emblem 8 0% Growths low turn count playthrough. To start things off, we do our last few shopping rounds in the entire game, because upon beating Chapter 15, we did get access to Barrier Staves, and those are quite nice for spamming staff rank and getting the staff rank. That obviously applies to units like Saleh, who needs B Staves, Natasha, who needs B Staves, and even Moulder, who needs S Staves eventually. As for this actual chapter, it's kind of a tough one, honestly. People don't really give it enough credit, I feel. Yet again, I am severely limited by Moulder. He doesn't have a warp range, and even with his warp range and everything considered, I thought we could only 5-turn this chapter. But upon further research, it appears that a 4-turn was just about possible with enough effort. Gerik especially is going to be quite useful with his new Swiftsole, and also a good and juicy 9-use hand axe. Of course I'm pointing that out because we are gonna break it in this chapter, and once again it's going to be absolutely crucial in clearing this chapter reliably and efficiently in 4 turns. Again, that's the goal. And yeah, this chapter is kind of tough, as I said before, because we start off on this side of the map, in this little corner. On Ephraim's route and Erica route, you start a bit closer to the throne, and so it's a bit easier to reach it. Meanwhile, Ephraim has quite a distance to go, and he can't actually go that far, remember, because he needs to stick around Ephraim needs to stick around Ducel and Erica, don't forget that. And we also have to do this weird little double warp, where we warp Gerik closer to the castle, and then we dance Moulder, and then we finally warp Gerik into the castle, just barely. It's very important that we get Gerik into the castle on turn 1, because otherwise we don't really have a way to 4-turn this. However, you'd think that there would be a way to do it in only 1 warp, and there actually would be a way if Moulder was promoted with that extra +1 movement. But Moulder obviously isn't promoted, so we had to use 2 warps sadly. The one benefit of using 2 warps though is that Moulder is now level 10 thanks to the extra warp EXP, and that means that he is able to promote next turn, and that will be helpful in its own little way. Meanwhile, Gerik is finally in the castle after that warpage, and he is able to progress and get to the throne room quickly enough. Again, one thing that you might think of doing is transporting or getting Ephraim over to Gerik, have Gerik rescue Ephraim, and then warp both of them in. It's kind of a 2-for-1 warp. However, that doesn't actually save any turns. We don't get a 3-turn from doing that, since Ephraim would be 1 tile short if he got dropped by Gerik on turn 2. And also, again, we don't get the supports, so it doesn't end up helping in that regard. So let's get Moulder promoted, right? Let's do Bish. Oh no. Kebe, what are you doing? There's absolutely no benefit to going Sage. Bishop has Slayer and the extra staff rank, which again matters because we need S Staves Moulder. Well, dear viewer, you would be right in saying that. Absolutely right. There's no reason to go Sage. I'm just doing it for the joke, because this is the one promotion in the game that really doesn't matter in this playthrough, because regardless, Moulder's not seeing much of any combat, so this whole Slayer thing doesn't really matter, and surprisingly enough, we get S Staves in time anyways, even without Bishop's boosted staff rank. And let's be honest, right? LTCs don't really go for Sage Moulder, so why not go for the mix-up, if you will. You guys can also be confused as to which Sage is Saleh and which one is Moulder, so that's obviously a benefit as well. Another nice thing about this map is that we are able to get a few staff uses in with Natasha and Saleh. Particularly Saleh, he's kind of tricky because barriers alone aren't enough. He also needs to go and use Unlock at some point in this map, because that gives a bit more staff experience than Barrier, and that +1 staff experience ends up mattering, it seems. But yeah, now it's time for this enemy phase, where we're able to use the hand axe in order to do some cool stuff. You may think, oh Kebe, you're so smart, you're using the hand axe to kill these knights and then switch to a sword slayer to one hit KO those sword slayers. One hit KO those sword slayers. One hit KOs those sword masters, I'm sorry. But that would be quite incorrect, because we could one round the knights with the sword slayer anyways, since they're so weak. Rather, we need the near broken hand axe because we are able to spare that dear knight's life. And let me tell you guys, despite the fact that that knight is an enemy and he is red, he is quite grateful that Gerik has spared his life. So much so that he is directly going to help us with the seas. And this knight ended up being the key, because I was having a really tough time in finding out a way to 4-turn this otherwise. But as you'll see, this knight ended up being really clutch. Again, breaking weapons, coming in useful once again. It's such a useful thing, man. And yeah, Gerik doesn't really care about taking damage on this turn because he is free to elixir next turn, as he also takes on the boss. Speaking of the boss, when you look at the throne room, you may think that the boss is the guy on the throne, a paladin. His name is Orson. He's in fact the same Orson that we've seen in Chapter 5X. He basically betrayed us after that chapter, and that's quite unfortunate, quite sad. However, he, despite what it seems, he is not the true boss of this chapter, because the true boss of this chapter is the priest left of Orson. That priest screwed me up so many times in this playthrough, because we want to warp Ephraim to the tile left of that priest, the priest on the screen right now. However, if we warp Ephraim there and the priest is still there when Ephraim gets warped, Ephraim doesn't have the movement in order to seize, because the priest blocks his way. What more can be said? We need to kind of get rid of that priest somehow, or at least get him out of the way. But I mean, Gerik's gonna be busy killing the boss, and that priest is still gonna be there, and he's gonna be a nuisance. That priest is a tough thing to deal with. But thankfully, our good pal, the knight, is able to come in clutch, move closer to the priest, such that, as you'll see at the end of this enemy phase, the priest will move out of the way, heal the knight, and that will allow Ephraim to get his C's, be in range of the throne, that sort of thing. His way will no longer be blocked. As for the actual C's process, you may notice that we have a lot of flyers and stuff over there. We need them in order to rescue drop Ephraim. We also need Moulder and Tetis in that general area as well, because Tetis is needed to dance Ephraim after he gets rescue dropped. Meanwhile, Moulder is needed, of course, for the warp. We also have Saleh over there because he needs to reach a door in order to unlock it. Well, as for the actual boss, Orson, he's kind of tough. He is really tough to one-round KO, especially since we don't have an effective weapon. We have neither a halberd, and the Zambato is not very effective at all. However, one thing that's very nice about Orson is that he has, as a sword, the rune sword. The rune sword's a pathetic weapon since it has your strength and is magic based, and that means that if we barrier Gerik, regardless of what Gerik is equipping, Orson will switch to the Silver Lance, and that ends up being very useful since we are able to equip a Lancereaver, dodge the Silver Lance, and still be able to kill him the next turn. We do need to dodge one of either Orson's 2 attacks or the Druid that also attacked. Meanwhile, we did that super cool rescue train in order to get Ephraim just in range of the throne on turn 4. We get Saleh's unlock, again that's kind of useful, kind of needed. And you can kind of imagine with that priest's previous location how Ephraim's way would be blocked, but once again, the good, friendly knight is able to help us in that regard. We also get Natasha to B Staves, so since B Staves is what we needed her to get for later in the game, we can kind of undeploy her from now on, because we don't really need to train her any further after B Staves. It should be noted that if we didn't give her her time in chapter 14, she would not have B Staves. So that is chapter 16, completed in 4 turns. Upon beating this chapter, both of the lords, Ephraim and Erica, get their promotions. And they're both quite pretty good promotions. The stats are really good, and of course, they get horses. Horses are important as well. 7 movement is kind of cool. And another nice thing is, well, Ephraim's a good combat unit, and in fact he's able to have 15 aid after promoting. Erica doesn't, because female horses have a hard time with rescuing, apparently. I feel like I was going to say something else, but it's kind of slipping my mind. Meanwhile, we also get Sigmund. Yeah, Sigmund and Sigwind. Those are the personal legendary weapons of Erica and Ephraim. Kind of chumpish, but whatever. And that is it. That is chapter 16. Again, completed in 4 turns and like 3 warps. See you guys next time for chapter 17.